Good morning. This is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. Hope everyone's doing good. It's a Thursday morning, around 10 o'clock. Weeks are just whizzing right by. It's hard to believe Thanksgiving was almost a week ago already. So yeah, hope everyone's doing good. Appreciate the growth in this page and the all the awesome support that people have been showing for this page. I just recently had another handful of videos go into the thousands range as far as people checking out the video and viewing the video. So really awesome, really exciting. So yeah, I usually like to start off a lot of these shows by just talking about some upcoming events and trying to plug them a little bit and trying to help promote, get the ball rolling as far as those kinds of things go. I find like I've gotten in discussions with people before about, I mean, on one hand, when you're putting together an event, whether it's, you know, anything in the arts, really, if you're doing, like, if you're a dancer or say you're, a film director, a musician, comedian, whatever that particular genre could be, or a theater company, it's, obviously you need to have all the ducks aligned. You need to have the material and the presentation really ready to go and present it. But then, and you have to be working and on board with people who are, of the same kind of mindset, and there's a good creative focus, and it's a positive environment. And that in itself is a tremendous amount of work and passion. You have to really work in a team, through and also with a team dynamic. Without that, you can't really have something that you're eventually maybe proud of or excited about. And that's like a whole other thing of, I think of the arts as far as, especially from a performer's perspective, or say the artist who is putting out their work. There's like there's lots of different hats, but I feel like there's the music application or the performance application, getting the material together, solidifying that group of like-minded individuals that are, into your vision or into your idea, or there's like the collective vision in place. That's one facet, but then also the promotional aspect for events and things like that. I've gotten into talks about discussions about that very thing, where there are a few folks who believe that one of the problems that we have here in the mid coast area for, like, say, events and trying to get people to come out to events is that there's just not enough people for there to be a creative audience, or people who, enough of an audience to support like various creative endeavors. And I feel like I kind of take the opposite. I have the opposite opinion. I feel like there are more people. I feel in Maine and here in the mid coast, there's more young people now than ever, and I feel like there are plenty of people out there. But I think the key part of it is trying to do as much work and promotion behind things as you can, and making things, when you're creating an event or trying to create that buzz maybe for that event, you have to try to make it appealing and give something to people that they might not have ever really seen too much, or it's something that's very rare to see, or it just entices your senses. It makes you excited as from the perspective of somebody in the public. So like and I think that's really key for all kinds of events. The I don't really buy into the notion that there's not enough people for that. I feel like there is. It's just you have to really, you have to dial it in as far as promotional aspects go. And I've learned a lot about that over the years. Kind of feel I've gotten better at it, but I look at those two things as separate. the when it comes to the art and creating something, a good product, hopefully, but then also doing and putting on that hat and knowing about the promotional aspect. So I usually try to do that with this show, where I try to get a little bit of a jump start with different things that are happening and try to plug them, to kind of get the ball rolling, even if things are, far, far off in the distance. So yeah, so as far as events go that we're going to be doing here, that we're all kind of related to the Film Fanatic camp here. We're going to be doing. I'm going to be doing an interview on Saturday with Ray Leone, who I've talked about before as a student of mine, and we're going to be doing an interview with his background and all about his background in the indie horror world. He's worked in a lot of films that are kind of, well, at least for me, I kind of consider them to be kind of like modern day exploitation movies. So I'm very excited about that. He's a really larger than life. Ray has this real larger than life personality anyway, and he's just great. And he has a lot of interesting different paths he's been on in his life, and so this will be really cool to talk about. His perspective working in the kind of the indie horror world. So stay tuned for that. That will probably be the next like interview segment that I do here for this channel. So I'm excited about that. So stay tuned for that. And also the other two events that we have coming up, we're going to be doing our live in person party where we're going to watch Freddy vs. Jason, and I'm going to be hosting that, and it's kind of more or less the first Film Fanatic event that I'll be putting together. I've been toying and thinking of that idea for a while about having some kind of a event that I could maybe put together or put on somewhere. And so decided to kind of do it more at my house. It's kind of taken on the shape of more of a like a get together, an informal get together, and kind of an excuse to have a party. So I haven't done anything like that in a long time as far as hosting something, aside from the movie thing. But the idea of it is that we're going to be getting together. I've put up a post and an event page for that show, and that's going to be coming up in December. So stay tuned for that. And we're gonna record the event. We're gonna put it up, and I'm gonna put it up on YouTube for to see, to just kind of capture the festivities. I'm not sure how many people will be there. I've said before, a lot of friends that I have and that I know, and people that I know in general, obviously know that I have a deep love for film, but I don't know too many people personally that are into the quote unquote slasher film kind of thing as much as I am, or even at all. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think it will be a fun thing to kind of get together and just have a party anyway. But it's going to be recorded, and then that's going to be put up on this channel. So stay tuned for that. I think it'll be kind of a fun and exciting event. It's also going to be, I mean, obviously centered on this great movie Freddy vs. Jason, and it's tied in, and a kind of a little bit of a celebration of the coverage I did of the Friday the 13th franchise a couple months ago. So it's tied in with that. So, but it's also going to be a little bit of a celebration of just all things Film Fanatic, and kind of the idea of actually making this channel a real thing, and trying to bring life to it, and celebrating the idea that, okay, it's been growing, and been really happy with the small accomplishments that have been achieved, every couple of weeks. So it's going to be a celebration of that too. And it's also all about folks who are supporting this channel, and friends and family and people I don't know that have been supporting this whole thing that I've been doing. So it's been really great. And then the other thing which I consider to be very much part of this whole world, with Quantum, we have a show that we just booked at the Poor Farm in January. So I'm very excited about that. That's going to be, a show at the Poor Farm in Union, which is an awesome venue. We've played there a couple times before. Very cool spot. And It's going to be with my friend Tom Luther, who has this project called Sphere Music, which is really incredible electronic music. We did a show over the summer, and it was a lot of fun. And Tom is a really great friend, one of the most talented people I know. I look up to him in many many ways. He's an incredibly smart and gifted musician, but he's also, I find him like just really inspiring. He's kind of a chameleon. He's always doing something new and different. There's so many numerous projects and bands that he's worked with in the years, and primarily uh, his main focus has always been based on original material, which to me even elevates my inspiration for him. So, but his new project, Sewer Music, is really awesome. It's real ambient based electronica, so very atmospheric. It has a very cinematic quality to it. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to start promoting that show pretty soon, so that'll be really exciting. And I'm also in the process of getting some other shows put together with Quantum. The real fortunate turn of events for me as far as that band is concerned, and just in general, I've been in contact, and I suddenly have like a pool about 5 to 6 different people that I've known for some time, and some I've just recently met that are also fellow electronic artists, and they're all doing really creative and really exciting things, and it's all original stuff. So suddenly there's like a whole pool of all of these great musicians in the area that I'm in contact with. So I'm going to really try to utilize that, and moving forward, I'm going to try to do these shows of where we can have a variety of different bands and a platform for these acts to perform. They're all diverse. They're all from different backgrounds. They're all original, and it's not your typical thing of what people think of as far as electronic music, where it's not a DJ thing of where people are playing other people's music. It's going to be, the main focus is always going to be original content. So very excited about that prospect. So moving forward, stay tuned for more events in the future. It's always a little bit more of a challenge to do those kinds of things during the winter as far as getting the ball rolling. It's easier, obviously, when the weather is warmer out and it's more of the tourist summer season. But I think there's still enough of an interest, and there's enough momentum to keep those things alive and try to maybe keep it on the in the forefront, over throughout the seasons. So yeah, stay tuned for that, for more. Stay tuned for that and more, coming events that will be happening. So today's show, I'm really really excited to do the show. I've been wanting to do coverage for this movie for a long time. I did a show on this movie, The Car, one of my all-time favorite exploitation movies. Just amazing. I did a show on this movie when I was doing Facebook Live. I did a series about it was probably, I did them for about a year. I started it in like January of 2021, and then since then I've been, I just kept making them, and I made all of these like videos of kind of like what I'm doing here. But I was making these live videos of where I would talk about movies that I love, and movies in my collection and various other things. But I did a Facebook Live video on The Car probably almost a year ago now. But this is, for me, The Car is like an essential movie as far as anything related to horror and anything especially related to exploitation. This, and I've seen this movie. This is definitely a movie of my childhood. This movie I've seen a bazillion times. A few years back, I bought this maybe 2, 3 years ago on Blu-ray. A few years back, I was at Bull Moose Music in Bangor. I was going through the bins, going through the walls. They have this really great section in Bangor. They have a pretty big movie selection. My favorite place to go is obviously Waterville. I feel like they have a bigger selection, but the one in Bangor is pretty good. And it's a little bit of a different things are a little bit more consolidated now as far as movies go, but they still have a really great selection. But I was going. I remember when I was there when I bought this, I was going through the racks and stuff, and I couldn't believe that they had this on Blu-ray. I was like, oh my god! I was just, and suddenly I just like got overwhelmed by feelings of nostalgia. These I got overwhelmed by these feelings of being so incredibly nostalgic, and because this movie was like kind of an integral part of my childhood. Like this was always on cable back in the day when I was a teenager, and even before when I was in middle school, and also in the days of VHS. I used to watch this movie constantly. Like this was that movie. This movie, The Car, was a regular staple in my diet as far as film and horror movies. The other few movies I can think of were movies like Tourist Trap, which I did a show on, which is probably my all-time favorite kind of grindhouse movie. That was a regular staple. Other movies were House by the Cemetery, Lucio Fulci. There was a whole bunch of movies, but those movies in particular I can think of just off the top of my head where I used to see them all the time, and they were just like fantastic. And this movie is like I feel is like one of the definitive, and it's a prime example of an exploitation movie. And it came out. It was put out by Universal, the Universal Pictures. It was distributed by them. It came out in 1977, which is so hard to believe. It was directed by Elliot Silverstein. It stars James Brolin, the great James Brolin. It has some really great actors: Thomas Scott, Geraldine Keams, Roy Johnson, Melody Thomas Scott, Kim Richards, Kyle Richards, Ronnie Cox. Just a really awesome cast. The and I was just blown away when like just the other, or actually today when I took this out of my for my shelf. I always forget that how old this movie is, and it's like from 1977, and I'm always blown away by it. Like wow, like I can't believe this movie is actually as old as I believe it to be, or that I thought it was. I always think it's like in the 80s, but when I say that this movie is like kind of the ultimate, example of an exploitation movie, this movie was like a direct, more or less, copy of Jaws. That was, I believe, is also Steven Spielberg's Jaws, which is an incredible classic movie. I really want to see it again. I haven't seen it in a long time, and it's also just an amazing masterpiece directed by Steven Spielberg. And that was released also by Universal, major company. So it was amazing that like they went from like I kind of consider, Jaws and then The Car to be like they're both horror movies, but I kind of consider, you know, the caliber of the directors. I look at like say Steven Spielberg, like I look to him or look at him as being like kind of a highbrow director, a major Hollywood director, and also like an iconic director, a living legend. He just recently came out with a movie which I can't remember the name of it, but it's essentially like a biopic of him when he was a kid and how he got into film, which I really want to see. And then I look at the director here, Elliot Silverstein. I look to him as being like more of an exploitation director, where he's working in this world of where the budgets are quite a bit lower. There's a lot of ripping off of other ideas, and the quality is a little bit compared to higher budgeted films. The quality is overall down, but there's also a certain aspect of where the film has this real grittiness to it. It's kind of cheesy, it's kind of silly and ridiculous, and but at the same time it has those elements of where it's still entertaining as all hell. At least I do. So I look at those Steven Spielberg as like a highbrow director, an Elliot Silverstein to be more of a exploitation or lowbrow director. And I find it really interesting and fascinating that both directors, especially Elliot Silverstein, being signed on to make a movie that was an obvious huge knockoff or ripoff of Jaws, and it was all done through the same company, Universal. And there's a really awesome, interesting interview with Elliot Silverstein on here. The special features on here are really great. And he basically says like the executives from Universal, like Jaws had just come out. Jaws had been out for like a few years. I think it came out in 1975. I could be wrong. I could be off by 1 or 2 years, but it came out before The Car, obviously. And when Jaws came out, it was a phenomenon. It was a massive commercial success. It just basically went on to obviously influence movies like this, and really was a huge success for Steven Spielberg. Commercially, it was a massive success, and it was a phenomenon. Like it got into people's DNA, and it kind of changed movie culture, and it also left like a kind of a psychological imprint on people, where people will legitimately, even to this day, are kind of cautious or scared to actually go into the ocean because of this movie. So it had a deeper impact aside from it being a financial success, but on a cultural level, it actually had that kind of impact where it legitimately moved people and changed to a degree people's behavior. And another movie I feel that was a real pivotal movie in those kinds of areas is The Exorcist. That when that movie came out, that was also a phenomenon and kind of a cultural thing, and it hit people on many different levels. It wasn't just an entertaining movie, but it actually people, like everyday people, started questioning ideas about religion and their faith, and went beyond it being just a film about entertainment. So the interview on here with Elliot Silverstein is very cool because he talks about he was approached by Universal after the success of Jaws, and it was this massive monster in the box office. They wanted to capitalize on it because they saw that there was like millions of people into this film, so they wanted to make a movie that just basically ripped it off and just milked that audience, as for as much as they could, and as for as much money as they possibly could. So they went, they hired Elliot Silverstein, and they assembled this cast. And James Brolin was cast. He was a very big actor at the time. He came off of Amityville Horror, which is another horror classic, which is probably a movie I'll eventually do a review on. That's an interesting trilogy too. There's some good movies in that trilogy, and Josh Brolin was very well known at that time, so they had a more or less a major name in the film. But their intentions, the executives at Universal, their intentions were they basically Elliot talks about, they sat him down and they're like, what we want to do with this film, The Car, was we want this to be Jaws but on land. We want this to be, instead of the shark, the great white shark, we're going to use this big black kind of demonic car to replace the shark. And and it's hilarious because if you watch this film, they rip off Jaws to such a degree where there's literally whole sequences that, if you see Jaws, and obviously you have to see Jaws, and if you haven't, I don't know what planet you live on, but there's literally whole scenes of where they directly copied. It's not like a homage to the film that's not influenced by the film, but they literally rip it off. There's one scene in particular with Jaws, say, for example, where in the beginning of the film, there's that notorious scene of the girl, being eaten up, and she's swimming with her boyfriend, and they're both kind of, they've been partying and they're both kind of drunk, and she's swimming and she disappears, and then her body washes up after being eaten by Jaws. So that starts this investigation and a panic, and it builds and builds. And then the classic scene in Jaws of where they're they're at this beach, and the beach is packed. It's summertime, and there's like hundreds of people running around, and suddenly somebody sees something in the distance of where they believe it to be a shark, and somebody eventually gets attacked, and all this chaos ensues, and people are trying to get everybody, all their loved ones, and get their families and their kids and the elderly people that are swimming, trying to get them to a safe space, and they're trying, and Roy Scheider is in is basically trying to save people and trying to get them out of the water as quickly as possible. And it's this whole like long kind of sequence, and it's really great and it's amazing. It's very intense and it's scary. There's a scene in Car where it's literally that scene of where there's a like a congregation of kids that are rehearsing for this big kind of parade, and they're in this kind of ravine, and the whole film takes place in the desert. And somebody spots this car, and there's been a series leading up to that scene. There's been a series of where a few people's bodies have been found and have been killed, and the local police force are investigating it. The same exact thing as Jaws, and it leads to this thing of where there's a huge group of people, families and kids, of where somebody spots the car in a distance, and it's hilarious because it's not a variation on that scene, or it's literally a shot scene by scene of that, and of that scene. It's such a ripoff, and there's a bunch of other scenes too. The ending too, for instance, and but at the same time, this movie has its own charm because it's so ridiculously cheesy at times, and some of the effects are so bad that it just gives it this like real silly kind of thing, but yet it's so entertaining. And I remember, when I saw this film, this film always really scared me as a kid, and watching it now as an adult, an old man, it's still, I think, pretty riveting. I think it's got some real intensity to it, and the design of the car is pretty intense, pretty amazing. There's definitely a level of suspense to the film. Some of the kills are really great. The ending is, I think, a really great payoff. The music is really great. One of the things that's so amazing about this Blu-ray edition, like again, like I said, a lot of these great kind of grindhouse exploitation movies always come with, a massive amount of special features, and this is definitely no exception. Like, this has a really great menu of behind the scenes features and special features and interviews. It's really awesome, really fascinating, really goes in depth to the whole idea of how this film was made. And also, they also talk about you know it was obviously a ripoff of Jaws, but the filmmakers and the team that made this film were not given the same amount of money for as Steven Spielberg. So they had lots of limitations to what they could do on a technical side. And it shows in this movie, but I think it actually adds a lot to the charm. But as far as Blu-rays that I own, movies that I feel are something to really be seen on Blu-ray, in all its glory, with like really amazing picture, sight and sound, all of those things that you want from a movie where it's immersive. This movie is just, it might be, my favorite film in this kind of genre as far as how it looks on Blu-ray. The transfer of this on Blu-ray is stunning because the whole film, and the interesting contrast too, that's different with Jaws and the car. Jaws takes place in like New England, and it takes place on the ocean, where this film takes place in the desert, so there's no water. It's a kind of a cool contrast. But the cinematography for this film is just amazing. The music for this film too is also just incredible. It's probably one of my favorite kind of film scores. But the cinematography is just amazing. There's like these scenes, these long panning shots where you get this, this giant scope of the desert, and you see the car way off in the distance where you can just barely see it, and it's slowly kind of coming to the camera, and you see this dust from the sand of the desert kind of kick up, and then it just builds and builds and builds to this intensity, and then suddenly the car comes kind of directly into focus, and you see this like this giant storm of sand, and it's super dramatic and really beautifully shot. Like the cinematography for this film is pretty outstanding. Like it's world class. Like I think it's as kind of cheesy and bad as this movie is, but yet super entertaining. I feel like it has some things about it that are high level. Like the cinematography, I think is not that I believe in it so much, uh, but I think the cinematography, especially for this film, is worthy of like an Academy Award. Like it's really gorgeous, and you get there's all these great panoramic shots, and it's almost because it takes place in the desert, and because of all of these giant panoramic shots, and you really get the scope of the landscape. It almost feels like at times like it's a western, like a classic. If you watch any of the classic John Ford movies with John Wayne, John Ford, one of the greatest directors, ever. He had this certain style where he would do these long panning shots, and a lot of his films would take place in the wilderness or in these desert climates or desert locations. So you'd always get this like giant scale, you'll get a sense of the scale and scope of how large this universe was. So that I get that same kind of feeling when I watch this movie, just with the cinematography alone, and also with the music. It really gives it this big scale. So I almost feel like that makes up for the lack of money that they had for this movie, in which I still think the effects are really great, but the cinematography is so strong for this movie that it helps. I feel present the movie in a way that it's a great movie, from a technical standpoint. So, yeah, then and again, since I bought this movie, I've seen it another I don't know how many times. I'll probably have to watch it again now that I'm sitting here talking about it. But yeah, just so darn good, so damn good. One of the most entertaining movies ever. And over, I remember, like I said, on Facebook, I did a couple of posts. I did a regular written post of this film, and then also I did a little video review, and I was amazed by. I remember it was around when I did the post of where I had a picture of the car, and I did a little review. I was amazed by the amount of people that had reacted to it, and I was like, wow, like a lot of people know of this movie because it's pretty obscure. I mean, it was fairly popular, but I believe after watching the special features and interviews with Elliot Silverstein, this movie was like pretty much a commercial failure. It went, it didn't really go anywhere, and it eventually found an audience, a little bit of a cult audience, years later. But compared to Jaws, was insignificant as far as the revenue it made. So, but I was I was super surprised when I done a post about this film. People that I didn't think that I kind of know that I didn't think were into these kinds of movies had all had this like strong reaction to this film, and they were like, "Yeah, I remember this movie. I used to watch it," and they were describing kind of how it was for me as a kid. Like, yeah, I used to watch this movie all the time. It was on cable and used to rent it on VHS, and it was a regular thing I used to watch. And I was like, wow, like, yeah, this is one of my favorite movies, in the horror genre. And so, yeah, but if you get a chance, The Car, 1977. It's hard to believe it came out and it's that old, but it still holds up. One of my all-time favorite exploitation horror movies. One of my all-time favorite movies, and definitely this transfer and this edition of the Blu-ray is easily one of the best, if not the best, uh, you know, uh, package that I have. And again, I'm attributing it to mainly the cinematography. It's gorgeous. So this is Jason Dean, a film fanatic. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.